Okay, today my guest is Professor Ravi Ramamurti. I will keep my introduction short to maximize our time with him. In the next 30 minutes or so, he'll talk about Ravi as a person, Professor Ramamurti is a thought leader and an esteemed scholar, and finally is a mentor to many PhD students and junior faculty. For the sake of time, I will skip many of his accomplishments and give you a very quick snapshot. Professor Ramamurti is an AIB Fellow. He has served as secretary to the Fellows of the AIB and also as a division chair, program chair, and pre-conference chair for the Academy of Management's International Management Division. He was a member and chair of the JIBS Decade Award Selection Committee, Richard Farmer Dissertation Award Committee. He also served as a member of chair of Doctoral Consortium and Junior Faculty Consortium at AIB. He sits on the editorial boards of JIBS, Global Strategy Journal, Journal of International Management, Management International Review, and has served as a consultant to firms or governments in Argentina, Bangladesh, Bolivia, Ecuador, Egypt, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Mexico, Nicaragua, Saudi Arabia, and South Korea. He also has various positions at the World Bank, United Nations, U.S. Information Agency, UNCTAD, U.S. Agency for International Development, and he was a program advisor to The Economist on the Economist education offering. He received the Most Outstanding Thought Leader on Strategy and Innovation in Emerging Markets in the world in 2017 by Global Awards and won the 2017 Best Paper in Global Strategy Journal. Thank you, Ravi, for joining us.
Thank you for doing this. Nice to meet you.
Same here. What did you want to become when you were a child?
That's an interesting question. You know, growing up in India, we young people had 3 or 4 options. At least that is what you were told. Either you're going to be an engineer or a doctor, or you would join the civil service. And a few people maybe would go into academics. Now, my thinking was heavily influenced by the fact that I grew up in a family with 6 boys. We were 6 boys, and I was the youngest. And my oldest turned out to be a physics professor. The one after that was an engineer. The one after that studied physics. The one after that studied engineering and then switched to physics, and so on. And my father had a PhD, which is very unusual because he came from a very poor family that most of whom didn't go to college. So I think somewhere in the back of my mind, and maybe it was explicit, that you should get a PhD. It doesn't matter what you do, you got to get a PhD. And so after I got my MBA, I immediately started thinking about where should I go get a DBA. But at that time, I honest to God did not know that if I got a DBA or a PhD, I would have to be a professor. I thought I would be just a super MBA. I was better than all the other MBAs who didn't get a DBA, for instance. It's only when I came to the US and as I was finishing up my DBA at HBS, that I realized the school was preparing me for a completely different career from what I thought I was going to be pursuing. Anyway, so to cut a long story short, as a kid, I had no idea what I was going to do. I had only one responsibility. No matter what the subject was, I had to master it and get an A.
And no pressure from that family. Everyone accomplished. Okay, so can you pinpoint the earliest moment of international versus domestic?
That's interesting in my case because, you know, at the age of 6, my father left India and took up an assignment in Bangkok. So I moved with them. My older brothers, you know, were all in more advanced grades. So they either stayed back or whatever. So I went to school for 3 years in Bangkok. And then my parents moved to Nigeria. So then I would visit them in Nigeria every summer. And even when I was in middle school, we went on a trip in Europe. And so I think for me, it was very international from very early on.
And how did you choose international business to study as an area?
Yeah, again, an accident. It was an accident because I came into the HBS doctoral program in the strategy area, an area combining strategy and implementation. And but I had worked in a state-owned company in India, and I expected that I was going to do some dissertation relating to my work experience.
Mhm.
I'd worked in the government and I had worked in a state-owned company as the executive assistant to the CEO. So I saw some things very interesting about how organizations are managed and state-owned companies in particular.
Mhm.
So I thought I'd work on that, but there were very few people at HBS with any interest at that time in developing countries, and even fewer who were interested in state-owned companies.
Mhm.
Oddly, there was one person who was visiting HBS. His name was Yair Aharoni. He was visiting from Israel. And I thought, oh God, he can be my advisor. But then his visiting appointment ended and he had to leave. And then suddenly I had no one who I could advise me. Then someone said to me, why don't you go talk to Ray Vernon? And Ray Vernon had a reputation of being a very tough taskmaster and a terror among the PhD students. And many of them told me, don't go anywhere near him. But I did. And I had a wonderful time. And he ended up being my advisor. So I became de facto IB, even though what I studied was actually the strategy of state-owned companies in India, as opposed to anything international. But because I had Vernon as a supervisor, I had now the credentials to teach international business. And of course, being from India in the US, I was very interested in other countries. So it was a natural fit.
Perfect. Something that is not on your CV that is interesting for the audience.
Well, I mentioned I'm one of 6 boys. That's maybe interesting. We have a set of twins, a boy and a girl, in addition to an older child, which there's a whole story about the twins. It was a very scary time when they were born because they were premature and they were in the hospital. My wife was in the hospital for 3 months.
Oh.
So we're very, very happy now that they're healthy and doing well. People may not know that I like to do the crossword a lot, and I like word puzzles, and I often will get up at 3 or 4 in the morning and rush to do the New York Times spelling bee. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah.
It comes alive at 3 a.m. So I check my answers from the previous day, and I try to do it before my wife is up or my daughter is up. We have three of us are competing all the time with each other to see who completes it first. Anyway, but I enjoy the word puzzles. Also, I enjoy foreign movies actually a lot. One of my favorites is the Iranian director Farhadi, the guy who produced a movie called The Separation. I don't know if you've heard of that, or The Salesman. Terrific movies. But again, I enjoy the foreign movies because I see it's a window into the foreign culture. Because through the movie, you get to see. I mean, how would I know what daily life is like in Tehran? But then when I see a movie like The Separation, it's the people living there, and you see so many facets of that life, which otherwise you wouldn't. I wouldn't know where to go read what life is like. So I think traveling, culture, movies, food, these are all things that I enjoy a lot.
Perfect. If you stop doing what you're doing today, what would you do? What's the second best alternative? I don't want to say like if you retired today, but what's the second best alternative?
Yeah, I think I initially thought I wanted to be a manager. That's why I got an MBA. Then when I worked as the executive assistant to the CEO and I observed him closely, I realized that I just don't have the qualities required to be an effective executive. So that then pushed me into consulting as an option. And I thought getting a DBA would position me well to be a super consultant because I was a super MBA. But that wasn't the case. And so it actually was going to send me off into academia. So if I had not gone into academia, I already knew I couldn't be a manager. I would have been a consultant or a policymaker or an advisor to an international organization. I, in fact, did apply for the World Bank Young Professionals Program and was rejected. It was a very big blow to my ego.
Well, their loss, our gain. So regrets, have you got any?
Well, I did have, took me more than a year to get over the World Bank rejection because I saw it as an equivalent of working in the Indian Planning Commission being at the apex in the structure to get a bird's eye view of the whole organization. And I saw the World Bank as similarly providing a bird's eye view on a global level of organizations across countries. But then I realized afterwards that there's an even better way to do that. And that is to have one foot in academia, to have the autonomy, the independence. You know, when you're young, you don't realize that places like the World Bank are also big bureaucracies with their own politics and so on. And you have more influence actually as an outsider who comes in. And so I did a lot of consulting for the World Bank, including for the board of the World Bank. And so in the end, that turned out to be not such a bad thing. I discovered the joys of academia, one by slowly, the joy of teaching, which I didn't know I would enjoy it so much. And the joys of autonomy, the joys of being able to switch from one topic to another when you get bored with something, to being surrounded by young people all the time. You know, all these are things that I didn't know about academia when I started.
And it's kind of different for European scholars, especially with European Union institutions being more integrated with the university system there. It's a bit different. What are you most passionate about?
What am I most?
Passionate about.
Passionate about. Well, right now, I think building the Center for Emerging Markets, which I've started at Northeastern about 14 years back. And, you know, as I'm approaching the end of my career in X number of years, I would like to see if I can put that on a solid footing and make it, you know, one of the best of its kind. And so that's my passion at the moment, professionally.
Perfect. Now let's switch to research segment. How do you explain your research to people who don't read you regularly? And how do you explain the importance of your contributions, scholarly contributions?
Yeah, I think I would say that my work through my entire career has been about how can companies contribute to the competitiveness and the development of countries. I think that's been my common thread. That's the reason why after getting my MBA, I went to work for the Planning Commission rather than work for a company. I wanted to understand the connection between company and the bigger economy. That's why I went to work for the CEO of a state-owned company. You know, state-owned companies were very important in many countries at the time, and still even today. So I started actually my first decade, I was studying state-owned companies after I came to the US. And because nobody wanted to study them. And this is a common thread also in my research is I like to go where others are not going. If everybody is going somewhere, I don't want to go there. I want to go somewhere else. And usually it's big. What motivates me to go somewhere else is because I think there's a big issue, a big problem, and no one wants to study it. And I don't understand why. So that's the reason why I always studied what we today call emerging markets. I never looked at the developed countries, except as an opportunity for the emerging companies in the emerging markets, maybe to serve those developed countries. Because I felt in business schools, there was not enough attention being paid to large countries like India and Brazil. At the time, we didn't have China in the equation. Because I said there got 1 billion people in India. India always had 1 billion people for a long time. It's not something that happened overnight. And yet it was not considered important. So I looked at the state-owned companies, which are very important within the Indian economy. Then when they started to reform and deregulate and privatize them, I spent a decade looking at the whole phenomenon of privatization, deregulation, and how that transformed industries and companies. And then in the next decade or so, I looked at the companies that came out of this process of economic liberalization and privatization, and their competitiveness and their internationalization and their innovations. So that's really just all that I've been doing. And they all were motivated by how can we learn something that will improve the performance of these companies and therefore those economies.
Ravi, I'm curious. I'm asking my guests where they see the globalization versus nationalization debate. And some people are very much in favor of globalization becoming forceful again. Some people are on the other side. Where do you stand?
I think I come now looking at this from the perspective of the emerging economies. I think globalization is now a big friend of the emerging economies. The debate about globalization today is in the developed countries, whether it is serving their needs or not. So the tables have been turned. Right from when I started my career, all of the developed countries, led by the US, were preaching to all the rest of the world, go for open markets and go for globalization and privatization. And today, the emerging economies are saying, yeah, let's have globalization, let's have open markets, and it's in the developed countries that is second thought. And I think it actually serves all of the countries well to have open markets. The problem is when you have a country like, say, China, that within that system uses a heavy state direction and management of the economy. Nothing illegal in that. There's nothing illegal about having industrial policy, but it is becoming such a form. It has become so good at doing that, combining the state and market, the visible hand and the invisible hand. And no other country seems to be able to combine it as well. And
first, talking specifically about China.
I'm speaking specifically about China. But China is the big new development in the global scene that is going to affect so many things going forward.
What can we say about the big infrastructure investments that the Chinese government is undertaking in Africa, in India, the Belt and Road Initiative? What can we say about them?
Well, there is an element of win-win to it. There's also an element of foreign policy and strengthening China's position in the global economy, because all the roads eventually and belts, everything leads into China and out of China. So it's a brilliant idea from China's perspective. It solves many things. It makes use of their excess capacity. It makes use of their tremendous capacity to do projects, which is unmatched, I think, by any other emerging economy or developed country. And that is a resource that other countries can use, but also increases China's influence, it secures China's raw materials, and so on. So it serves the Chinese government would probably describe it as a win-win. As long as the country on the other side of the deal is able to look out for its own interests, it can play a part. But you have to also be at the wheel. You can't just say, let China figure out what's the right strategy for me.
Ravi, what can you say about the next 5 to 10 years of the field? And can you identify some of the understudied areas for the young scholars to pay more attention to?
Yeah. First, I would say, start with a phenomenon. Don't start with a database. Don't start with a journal or something in mind. Start with a phenomenon and pick a phenomenon that you think is important and interesting. In that order, it has to be important, I think, and then interesting. And so, if you take the digital transformation, that's a huge mega trend that's going to have all kinds of important influence. The rise of China and what that means, geopolitics as well as for business, and if scenarios of deglobalization or decoupling and all of that, very important, very interesting. Innovation, I think, is now becoming more widespread globally, and I've done work on what I call reverse innovation, which is the diffusion of innovations from developing countries to developed countries. I think we're seeing more and more of that, and I think we'll see even more of that. So, what are the areas in which these countries can do innovation of value to the whole world? I think we should pay attention to that. I think in our field, we tend to focus a little too much on the multinational firm, the large multinational, established multinational firm. We need to probably pay more attention to up and coming multinational firms, as well as the international firm that is maybe not a multinational at all, that simply exports and imports, has some technology ties, maybe a few subsidiaries overseas, but is not a very large, complicated multinational like General Motors or IBM.
Thank you. How did the culture of IB scholarship and scholars change over time?
Yeah, if you ask someone who's been in the field for 30 years, they're always going to say the good old days, we did all these wonderful things, but look what's happened now. But I do think that the people who started the field were very much phenomena driven. And there was a lot of thick description and analysis. And we have become too much into a number crunching profession. Personally, I find the hypothesis generating type of research is underrepresented, and we're doing too much of hypothesis testing. So I think that's because of the pressures to publish, and because the journals are still, it's easier to publish a quantitative paper than it is to publish a theoretical or a qualitative research. A lot of faculty, junior faculty particularly, are gravitating towards the number crunching approach.
Yeah, because referees, I don't think they, I've never seen a referee like a paper. Like they initially, naturally, they have to hate the paper, and it is the editor basically who picks up the constructive approach, right? About advice, especially like, well, for example, you learned from Ray Vernon. What did you learn, or what was the best advice you received from when you were going through the program?
I think I learned the power of good qualitative research from both Ray Vernon and the other member on my committee. One of the other members was Alfred Chandler, who was a business historian. And they both inspired me to do or convinced me of the value of thick description. That is, case studies, really, but done in depth and with a lot of reflection, and trying to use theory to guide your description, but always be true to the description. So if there's something that actually happened that was important, even if it doesn't fit in neatly with the theory, you leave it in there, because someday somebody else will maybe be able to figure things out more completely than you have. And Alfred Chandler was a business historian, and if you saw anytime you walked into his office, he was buried. His head was down. He was buried with books, and he was reading. He was trying to piece together exactly what happened, what led to what, cause and effect, right? So, and then he comes up with a simple hypothesis like structure follows strategy, and that becomes a very big influence on strategy. It becomes influence in OB, it becomes influence in international business. All kinds of people find truth in it. So I think that's the most important thing I learned from them. They were also both very good writers, which I wish I wrote as well as Ray Vernon would write. But he taught me some of those things. And I remember I submitted to him a conclusion, half-baked, because I was in a hurry to graduate. And he threw it right back at me and says, "No, Ravi, this is not good enough. You're not graduating. Go back, do what needs to be done." And I said, I thought I could do it after he signed off on it, but he said no. And that was an important lesson I learned. Do it once, do it right, and never compromise on that.
What are the common mistakes? What are the major pitfalls that you see in junior faculty or doctoral students?
Yeah.
What to do, what not to do?
Yeah. This is a thing I really struggled with, because junior faculty are worried about getting a job if they don't have a job yet. And if they have a job, they want to get tenure. That's the number one thing. And the system rewards certain things. And so I can never in good conscience tell someone, march to your own drummer, don't follow the system.
Mhm.
But and so what the system will make you do is go for quick results and publications, number of publications and all that. And that drives you towards data and rather than phenomena. And that's a pity. But so my advice to people would be, you can't single-handedly change the system. You have to play within the system. You have to get tenure. But at least after you get tenure, start marching to your own drummer.
Mhm.
Don't forever be marching to somebody else's beat, because then, that's what will get you the full professorship. And then that's what will get you a chair professorship.
Mhm.
So at some point, I think you can safely break away and follow your own gut and do what you think is important.
Mhm.
It took me a long time to realize that some of the things I was interested in studying were actually not important only in my mind, but actually they were truly important. But I never had the self-confidence to assert that. So I would say to younger faculty, believe in yourself. And if you think something is important, pursue it, stick to it. Eventually, people will see the light and your work will get recognition. Certainly, I've worked on emerging markets for 40 years. First, maybe 20 years of that, there was not much interest in many of those countries. Even in a society like AIB, there was a lot more focus on the US and European and later Japanese companies and maybe some Korean companies. But beyond that, countries were not of much interest.
Mhm.
But in the last 20 years, they've become so important that it's been wonderful. Like, what I was interested in has moved from periphery to center stage.
Mhm.
And I think eventually that'll happen to any topic that's important. That is,
Interesting.
if you're convinced it's important, stick with it.
Perfect. Ravi, what is one question I should have asked you but haven't?
Well, one question I wonder about is what will I do, or what should I do if I do retire? And I mean, what is a good role for someone like me when I'm not working on a university full time? I don't see that happening anytime soon. It's not imminent, but I have wondered what is a good way to spend one's time in that final chapter of, it could be 10 years, it could be even longer, we don't know. So
what would you do?
yeah, I mean, I'm debating between, continuing and helping in small ways without the burden of, teaching full time and so on, stay engaged in some fashion, to becoming a student again.
In what?
And learning. Well, there are anything about nature just amazes me. When I look at nature, I'm just in awe at, how what a sophisticated organism, say, human beings are, and how we evolved, and all of that is absolutely fascinating. And and then the origins of the universe. We're having this conversation now, as about as if something important, earth-shattering has been done by me. But in 5 billion years, we know the sun is going to disappear, and our solar system is going to disappear. I just find that kind of very hard to, the scale of time and the theories about the origin of the universe. It's like fiction.
Perfect. Ravi, thank you so much for your time, for your contribution. I learned a lot. You gave a lot of things to think about. I'm sure the audience will agree with me. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for doing this.